Superman overcame tremendous obstacles to become the success we know it as today. With pre-production and development now complete, the Man of Steel was ready to take flight. On March 24th, 1977, cameras rolled on both Superman movies with one objective in mind: verisimilitude.
Dick's great mantra was verisimilitude. Of course, we all had to look it up, but what it means is, I think, truthfulness. Keep to the reality, the real truth of the situation.
Dick has a talent because of the things that are in him as a person. He wants to believe in those myths. And when you can make an audience believe that what's happening on the screen, even though it's totally extraordinary, that this is actually happening, that's when you have verisimilitude.
I have a sign to this day in my office of Superman flying through the air and dragging a sign by him that says verisimilitude, because the story had to have its own honesty. Everybody had to believe it was real.
The epic production eventually ballooned to over 19 months of shooting. With the largest production budget to date, 11 units filmed simultaneously across 3 continents with over 1,000 crew members.
The long, grueling shoot was worse on Dick Donner than anybody, because as a director, you have to be there every day.
It was at times very difficult to keep your energy up on this picture. Very difficult to keep my energy up. And if I didn't have my energy up, it would be really rough, because I had to bring in a lot of false energy to people that didn't have it, both actors or crews, and it got to be a bitch.
The production, especially for its day, was just huge. It was 2 films. We were shooting scenes from the 2 films simultaneously, according to production conveniences, so that when we had Gene Hackman, we were shooting scenes from 2 and scenes from 1. Or when we were in the Daily Planet, we were shooting scenes from both pictures in the Daily Planet while you were in that set.
The most grueling part of it were obviously for Christopher and I the flying scenes, which were physically so uncomfortable and often downright painful, and tedious, and take after take after take.
A couple of times we landed short of the building. So we'd come in for a landing, but drop off the side, just drop out of view. It was hysterical. And other times they drop us too late. So we kind of went bouncing into the kitchen.
You'd finish your 14, 15-hour day. The driver would drive you back to London. That would take an hour. You'd just get 40 winks practically, and it was time to get up again and stagger back on the set. The only thing, again, that made them tolerable was knowing that Donner was working twice as hard as you were, and getting even less sleep if that was possible, and keeping you laughing.
That's your responsibility as a director. You have to generate this energy both for yourself and for everybody else. And if it's artificial, you can't let them know it's artificial. They have to believe you're really up there and spirited and giving it to them.
Production designer John Barry prepared storyboards of the entire script. These were used as an aid for the many artists that were working on the visualization of the film. One of the most significant of these artists was cinematographer Jeffrey Unsworth.
One person I can't say too much about in terms of his contribution to the film is Jeffrey Unsworth. Jeffrey photographed 2001. He won an Oscar for Cabaret. He's just a great, great cinematographer.
He was just this wonderful cameraman who saw everything through a little haze. And when he photographed it, it all had that slight apparition around it. Just slightly untouchable.
Sometimes when Dick couldn't figure out exactly what he wanted, he would say, let's lay some dolly track. And while they're laying the dolly track, Dick would figure out exactly what he wanted. And there were mornings when Dick would come on the set and he was so beat, especially halfway through, and Jeffrey would say, will we be laying dolly track this morning, Governor? And Dick would say, yeah, about 40 feet, 50 feet.
Jeffrey Unsworth was heaven. Jeffrey, when he lit me, would stop everything, insist on silence, and if there was any movement, would say, quiet, I'm lighting the lady. And I don't know, he just made you feel like a princess. I think I've never felt more beautiful in my life than when Jeffrey was lighting me.
He was magical. He never, ever said no. If it was really a problem shot and trying to be innovative on some of the things, he'd say, well, Richard, give me a moment. Let me think this out. And everything was just a lot more than yes. It was far better than I could ever conceive.
He was a wonderful man, and everybody just loved him. And the picture's dedicated to him. He died shortly after the film.
Rounding out the canvas of talented artists that would help visualize Superman was costume designer Yvonne Blake.
The Superman costume went through various changes because we were trying to perfect a look that nobody had ever done before. So it took a lot of testing and a lot of trying out of different looks and different shapes, in a way, to get to what we finally used, and trying to stick as closely to how he was drawn in the comic book.
I think with the costume, you're stuck with the fact that Superman is in tights. Chris was so disarming as Superman, so kind of shy, that you barely noticed.
We were also trying to make Christopher look very macho and very strong and not look feminine or silly.
Gentlemen, is that man all right?
All in all, there were about 25 different costumes. Some for the flying rig, some for just walking, others for flying on wires.
Alexander Salkin pronounced very early, as we were to begin shooting, about Superman. Either he has a big one, or he has nothing. So they put poor Christopher in this various assortment of sizes of codpiece under the suit and the red underpants. And some days Christopher come out and he'd be out to here, which would make me go ding, 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 because they were all made of metal, and Christopher goes, stop it, kidder, stop it. Or there'd be flat, and there was this endless discussion as to the size of Superman's equipment.
In the very beginning of the movie, we all came to the conclusion that it would be wonderful to have something very special for the Krypton costumes. And we decided that it would be wonderful to show a great energy from it, and that we should try and look into materials that were reflective. The material used was a reflecting material used for cinema screens. It's made out of minuscule balls of glass. It was very hard for us to manage, and we had to use cotton gloves because any time the material was touched by hand, it would lose its reflective quality. You can only photograph it in a very special way, and we tested it, and it looked quite amazing.
The most challenging part of Superman was bringing a diverse variety of special effects to life. And by far, the most difficult of these effects was making an audience believe a man could fly.
One of the biggest challenges that Dick had, and all of the great special effects people that were on it, nobody'd flown on screen before, except in stupid ways where you could see the backdrop and they're going by. I mean, you know, the TV series of Superman. Nobody knew how to make him fly.
The first time I ever saw Chris really fly was at Shepperton Studios, where we built Fortress of Solitude interior. They said, okay, let's try it. And they rolled cameras, and he took off. The takeoff and the landings were terrible. They were very difficult to coordinate the cable movement up and down and lateral, and without jerking him all over the place. And he took off beautifully. It's the first time I ever saw the takeoff. And it was Chris that made all these things work, because it wasn't just this. He flew. He really flew, and he moved his arms in a very fluid way, and he came at camera, and for some reason, he actually banked his body, and he swung around this thing and flew past us. Camera stopped rolling. There was dead silence, and then like 50 people all of a sudden started just cheer. It was hard to believe. We actually did it. We actually made a man fly.
He flew in about 10 different ways in the movie. There were wires, there was some animation. He was catapulted in some things. There was blue backing, there was black backing, there was gimbals that he was lying in. And a lot of it was like the Wright brothers.
This was experimental stuff we were doing back then. I remember at the time, just to get the shots, were very technically very difficult to get them. The exposures, the balance between the plates and the foregrounds, very difficult stuff. And so it was all a bit sort of string and chewing gum type, making it work.
used many different techniques on Superman. Practical effects, physical effects, optical effects, process projection, models, miniatures, anything to make a shot work we used. You see, this was long before computerization. That's made a big difference to us because, of course, you can do things much quicker. But at this time, everything was hand done, and it really was many artists and very talented artists that we had to use to do some of this work. Lots of effects had to be plotted and done manually, but it did give you a little opportunity to do a little bit more finesse than actually the computers do in a sense, but of course it took a lot longer.
Principal photography wrapped in October of 1977, and we had a big party and everybody went home, except me, and I stayed another year doing flying shots and special effects.
I had a golf cart, and I had about 5 little radios in it, and I'd run all over the lot with Chris Reeve in it, going from unit to unit to unit. They'd say, we're ready for that, we're ready for that, we're ready for this, right? And sometimes you'd spend the whole day with not getting one unit going. There was so much preparation.
Dick has that rare quality of being able to instill in the actors a sense of fun and a sense of this is your project. This is yours. Let's see what you can do. Let's open it up. Let's perform. Let's have fun. But Dick's strong personality and sense of fun and love, not only for the project but for the actors, and it makes it working with him just a pleasure.
The character of the guy, the kind of man he is, the kind of general he turned out to be, a terrific general who everyone was very happy to follow in his service and do his bidding. I felt that I had a complete creative cape of my own, so to speak.
I don't think if Dick hadn't been directing it, 3 people could not have directed that movie. He had such incredible stamina and love for the project.
But what he did as a director is the sign to me always of a really good director. Each one of us was directed in a different way according to our needs. And he figured out very early on one's vulnerability as an actor, one's strength, and helped you that way. He knew that if he got my energy up, got me giggling, and then let me roar into a scene, that you never knew what would happen, and that often something very funny and good would come out of it. So he would do that with me. He would joke with me. He'd tease me relentlessly, pull practical jokes, and always get me.
Dick Donner is the biggest kid on the block, and his sense of playfulness really is what gave the movie its magic.
But remember, there's a wire on your neck.
Yeah.
And don't touch those wires together. You'll be short-circuited and you go up in flames.
We were on it for a year and a half. And then when people say a film crew becomes a family, we really became a family in a way that I've just never had before. My daughter was part of the family. We were so close. We took vacations together that the relationships between all of us were real, genuine relationships. There's just no question about that. They were deep, they were long-lasting. And Dick really took care of us. I mean, he took care of every crew member. He never forgot a birthday, he never forgot anything.
The one thing that always sticks in my mind about him, which I love him for, is that when I talked to him originally at the Beverly Hills Hotel, I had a mustache, and I told him that I wanted to keep the mustache. And he said, well, let me think about it, and when you come on the set, we'll discuss it. The first day I was in England, and he was up on a big scaffolding, and I climbed up there to see him, and he says, what about the mustache? And I said, well, I don't know, I would really like to keep it. And he says, if you shave your mustache, I'll shave mine. And I said, okay. So I went back to makeup, and we did all this thing, and I shaved the mustache off, and I came back on the set, and we were doing the makeup test, and I said, Dick, you got to shave your mustache off. And he says, okay. And he took it and he peeled it off. And he had set that up. I loved him for doing that. That was just great.
Dick never, in the course of the picture, got a budget. He never got a schedule. He was constantly told that he was over schedule, way over budget, but nobody told him what that budget was or how much he was over that budget. And at one point, he said, why don't you just schedule the rest of the film for 2 days and I'll be 9 months over.
Well, I believe we went a year over schedule, which would make it a long shoot. I think that's maybe a record.
One of the dilemmas involved in negative pickups generally is that if there is an overrun, it's the producer's problem. If the costs exceed the budget, it's not the studio's problem. It's the producer's problem.
As the Salkins saw they needed more and more money, Warner Brothers, who was originally just going to distribute the film and put up a certain amount of money, as Warner started to see the rushes and like what they saw, Warner's got to be more and more involved financially.
The studio was more than happy to step in and buy an increasingly bigger share of the movie. In exchange, Warner's received lucrative television and foreign theatrical rights. As their ownership diminished, an obvious target for the producers' frustrations was director Dick Donner.
As Dick and the Salkins were really kind of at each other's throats, Dick Lester was brought in as a go-between, and my theory was they were clearly waiting for Dick to either quit or to get so obstreperous that they were going to fire him, and then Dick Lester was going to take over. But Dick stuck it through.
It was a lonely period. It was a long period. It was tiring. It was exhausting. But I had taken on the project of making Superman, and damn it, nothing was going to stop me.
He was under a great deal of stress, too, because for whatever reasons, the producers either wanted him to hurry up or do better, or whatever producers want.
The Salkins could not have been easy producers to have. They seemed to be spending a tremendous amount of time horse trading with Warner's to try to get more money so they could actually pay the bills to get the two movies shot. It had to be a difficult time for everybody.
Dick kept the problems between him and the Salkins from us as much as possible, but we all at that point had opinions, prejudices.
We were always in a state of panic in terms of, is the money running out, or the money's not running out? Are they pulling the plug on this? Is so-and-so going to happen? Are we going to be able to finish 2, which we did not have enough money to finish 2. We literally ran out of money, and Warner Brothers said, let's put the first one out and see what we've got.
With the focus now solely on Superman 1, Donner returned to familiar ground with editor Stuart Baird. A tried and true collaborator, Baird's electrifying style of film editing ignites Superman off the screen.
God, look up there!
The hell's that?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
When I was doing Superman, I could think of nobody else but Stewart to cut this.
When working with Dick, as working with any director, we'll talk about the scenes and what the scene is about, or what the mood is about, or what the intention is about. And my job is to take that material that's being shot with all that intent in it and bring that out of it. That may not be brought out in exactly the way, or edited and cut in the way that he had conceived when he shot.
If you're challenging each other, there's that love-hate relationship, because you both know you're right.
Stewart and Dick used to love to just natter at each other, and they had the most wonderful, healthy working relationship.
Stewart would go berserk, because I would love what he did, but maybe I didn't like it enough that I wanted it that way. I would want to change it. And he'd scream and rant and rave and storm out and get in his car and quit and leave the lot. And I'd up 2 other young editors. He'd come running back in. He said, "What are you touching my machines for?" And
I think Dick, he'll remember better than I maybe, I think he fired me 2 or 3 times on this picture.
Stewart was Dick's conscience on going too far, or this or that. And Dick would say, no, I want that. And Stewart would say, don't be silly, don't be daft, you can't do that.
a dear friend, a great editor, an incredible contributor, and today he is a great director.
One of the last pieces to come into place was the music by composer John Williams. Williams' score brought a soul to the movie and a musical voice to Superman. Still today, the music remains ingrained in American culture.
One of the great thrills is to go in after you've cut the movie and you've done all the work and you think it's working and stuff, and suddenly you go into the scoring stage and the composer strikes up and the orchestra starts and the movie comes alive.
One of the essential things about the film to me was the fact that it was fun and didn't take itself too seriously, and the way Richard had directed it, and particularly the way Chris and Margot had played the parts, that it had an almost kind of theatrical camp, if you like, to it, that didn't take itself too seriously, and that if one could strike a level of theater and sleight of hand and tongue-in-cheek in the creation of the themes, that it might be the right idea.
When somebody that has the command musically that he has gets with 100-piece orchestra and starts to go, it's just so thrilling. I mean, when you have a great score for a movie, it just brings everything to life.
The day we went into a recording studio and we ran the opening credits, and as Superman came on the screen, I swear to God, if you listen carefully, it literally, the music speaks the word. I screwed up his take because I just ran out on the floor yelling, genius, genius, fantastic. You know, the orchestra applauded him and everything. But it was, if you listen, you can actually hear the music say the word.
The hero theme, which is Superman himself, which is made up of several parts, is kind of a fanfare. Each time he opens his shirt, you get this sort of three-note Superman musical motif that precedes the exposure of his shirt. So that if he's going through a revolving door, the music, whatever the 6 or 8 seconds preceded that, we established a kind of modus operandi that each time he revealed the shirt, there was this musical, balletic preparation.
John Williams is a master, as he's proved it time and again, with big scores and small scores and epic scores and delicate little piano scores. Fantastic.
I tried to have the music constructed in such a way that it would be heroic and big and operatic, but not take itself seriously.
The original release date for the film was intended to be the summer of '78. They just couldn't get the movie done in time to do it. When you have a movie that you hope will make this kind of impact on the public, you look for the highest profile time possible to release it, and the next highest profile time possible was Christmas.
To deliver the film for Christmas '78, we were down to the wire.
All the pressure was to get it done for this date, so I don't think there was more than 8 or 10 weeks between actually finishing the final shooting and getting it into the cinemas.
The last act went not adagio, but super prestissimo, very quick. And I do recall that sort of rush to the finish line.
I mean, I'd still be shooting. I still had optical units going. We still had opticals coming in from all over the world, really.
The film was done in such haste because we were on such deadlines. We never had a preview. Superman was never previewed.
We were cutting negative at that point, dubbing, scoring.
The studio had to have this picture for this date. It was such a huge event.
The Superman event was launched with a stirring teaser trailer nearly a year before the theatrical release.
Richard Greenberg, who'd been hired by Dick, found this wonderful piece of footage which was taken from the nose of a jet flying through clouds. Audiences were just cheering. And it made everybody feel so great.
Greenberg later adapted the trailer's title design for the film's innovative opening title sequence.
The selling of a movie called Superman required us to prove to people, or claim to people, that we had done something in the movie that nobody ever done before. The tagline that said, "You believe a man can fly," was the single most important part of the whole marketing campaign. It was our way of saying to the ticket-buying world, we've learned how to do things in movies you've never seen before, and what better way to do it than to give you this spectacular new version of Superman.
Superman the movie was released during the 1978 Christmas holiday season on December 15th. The film was greeted with rave reviews and blockbuster box office performance, and reigned as Warner Brothers' highest-grossing film for years.
What's the feeling when a film opens and it goes through the roof? You're part of it. You're going right up through the roof with it.
If you're part of something that's successful, that it is kind of your kid, and you go and you watch people line up for it. You know, I don't care how many pictures you do, if you have a big hit, it just makes you feel wonderful.
It was a bit like a dream. You don't really put it together until after. You're kind of so stunned that you don't know what's happening. You're going, wow.
The movie, both in terms of its appeal to the audience and then its commercial success, probably performed at the uppest end of everybody's hopes.
It's just the most fulfilling, one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. And as The Omen was before, this Superman was that much more.
Even though we were all enjoying the success of Superman, it was back to work for all of us, except Richard Donner. Much to everyone's surprise, the Salkinds decided not to bring Donner back to finish shooting Superman 2.
Well, I was not looking forward to 2 because Donner wasn't directing it, and the dynamic was entirely different. And so it was impossible not to feel affected by it, not to feel angry about it, and very disappointed.
We're all fired, by the way. All sorts of Jeff and John Barry, and so it was very sort of ugly with the Salkinds.
The minute Superman came out and was a hit, they fired Dick. I've always been convinced that if Superman had been a flop, they would have made Dick finish 2.
But Superman was not a flop. In fact, it was a tremendous success, and the magic still endures to this day. I can truly say its legacy will be with all of us involved for the rest of our lives.
It's lived on in people's memory as this magical picture. It was really Dick's vision, and it's Dick's heart, and it was Dick's humanity that made it a special picture.
He took such care with it and was like this big kid on the set, and that instilled in everyone that kind of sense of fun and caring.
Superman was one of those interesting times when a movie about a cultural icon became a cultural icon.
It works. I've watched it when it's on when nobody's around, so I don't look too vain. And it works. It still works, and I think it'll work forever.
The film captured what we want Superman to look like and to be like. And there may be in future generations other films, but I doubt if they'll ever get it quite as right.
It was done right. An audience goes away with such a reservoir of goodwill for the character and affection for the character that they come back again, as indeed they did.
The subtleties of this film, and such a broad, such a recognizable character that Clark Kent and Superman, and between Richard and Chris Reeve, they accomplished what I really regard as a miracle.
If it hadn't been Christopher Reeve playing that movie, playing that role, bringing him to life, I truly believe we would never have had the success we had. Because I don't think there was an actor out there that I knew then, or I know now, that could have done what he did to bring that character to life.
The appeal of flight, I mean, Batman's got a cool car, but flight is what really captures people's imagination. I mean, to take 2 or 3 running steps and soar into the air. I mean, that's everybody's dream.
The magic behind the cape. Here to give you an in-depth look at how the Academy Award-winning special effects were created for Superman, Oscar winner Roy Field.
Hello, my name is Roy Field. I'm a supervisor of optical effects for Superman. I'd like to give you an overview of some of the special techniques and special effects that we developed for this movie. I'd also like to show you some very interesting early test footage. In order to fully appreciate the special effects work on Superman, you must remember that this film was made before the advent of digital technology in filmmaking. Almost every imaginable technique of the time was used. and many were invented just for this film.
What would today simply be created in a computer, in the late 1970s, took a multitude of different techniques and many skilled artists to complete. Most of Superman's effect shots have combinations of different techniques in them. Les Bowie, Colin Chilvers, and Roy Field, along with director Richard Donner, carefully devised the processes used to realize the effects on the screen. Let's start with a look at the use of miniatures and models. Miniatures require special photography such as slow motion and atmosphere to give the object its mass and proportion.
These are the Krypton miniatures built by Derek Meddings. With miniatures, it's important to establish the scale, and the one way to do that is by showing a human. Here you can see the people trapped in that little beam of light, and that tells you the scale. You can see what a massive building this is, and the speed of the camera slows it up to make it even more dynamic.
This model of the Golden Gate Bridge was built on the lot at Pinewood Studios. Finished, it stood 70 feet long and 20 feet wide. The closer shot of the bus had a larger, more detailed model. Intercut with the children inside the bus and the shot of Superman flying past, the illusion becomes complete.
Okay, kids, it's all right now.
This miniature of the Hoover Dam was built at 1/50th scale. Photographing it was complicated because it was accompanied by a full-scale prop: water.
To feel the impression of enormous amounts of water, we had to run the camera at a very high speed. This will slow the action down and get a lot of volume and power into it.
A test shot of the Baby Kal-El starship was photographed with wires, which would be removed later. The spacecraft measured 2 feet wide and was covered in a reflective material made by the 3M company.
For the formation of the Fortress of Solitude, Dick Donner wanted a magical look with a feeling that it was created from nothing. Lighting and atmospheric effects, along with impeccable editing, perfect the scene.
The Air Force One miniature was designed from actual plans of the real plane. It measured 4 feet across. Different scale sections of the airplane were built to accommodate the scripted action. Here, the burned-out engine and wing were built at full scale to photograph correctly with Christopher Reeve. Superman used physical effects in practically every scene. These effects are performed on the set and have to interact with other types of effects.
Colin Chilvers used hydraulics to thrust out large columns seen breaking through the floor during the destruction of Krypton. The sets were shook and spun on huge gimbals, hydraulically controlled. This football, coincidentally made out of wood, was fired out of an air cannon buried in the ground. One of Colin's most difficult jobs was crushing Lois Lane's car. The auto was dropped into the ground in New Mexico via a buried mechanism. It was extremely dangerous because Margot was in a very confined space. The car sections with Margot Kidder in them were crushed on the set back in England with a real automobile crusher. She was a very plucky girl to put up with all the effects.
One effect that proved extremely difficult was young Clark Kent running beside a train with uncanny speed. Many different techniques were tested, including a man just simply running and then frame cutting to change his speed. Animated speed trails, motion blurring, and other types of effects were tried, but proved ineffective.
We eventually came to a system where we actually put him on 2 small wires and tracked with him along with an overhead crane. This allowed his feet not to actually touch the ground. We had his shadow, which I was so keen to have, and we don't get on process work. And also, we could control his speed. My area of expertise is optical and matte effects. Optical effects are the art of combining one, two, or many images onto one piece of film. Here's an example of different parts of the frame being exposed at different times. Les Bowie did a painting for the top half of the building. The bottom half was shot in New York. The helicopters and miniature which were moved up and down against the painting. All this was then combined on the optical printer. This is the optical printer. This is used for speeding up, slowing down, multiple images, all sorts of techniques. A wonderful machine. Here is the projector, where we place one piece of film. Another piece of film can be placed in this plane. And this is the camera that rephotographs it. And the picture goes along this line.
The virtuous spirit has no need for thanks or approval, only the certain conviction that what has been done is right.
Production designer John Barry envisioned the idea of a disembodied head of Jor-El. Marlon Brando was shot against black velvet to allow for his superimposition in the Fortress of Solitude.
One of the big problems of this sequence was getting the effects right on Jor-El's face. We did many tests, some colourful as this one. In the end, we decided to keep it very plain and very simple.
My son, you do not remember me.
Different concepts were explored for the sequence where Jor-El teaches his son. But in the end, it was decided that it would be more dramatic to just use Brando's narration over space footage combined with fantastic images.
Peter Parks and Oxford Scientific Films produced some very interesting images for the journey, which used macro photography. He had a system of collecting algae from under the surface of the sea in Bermuda. These objects are about the size of a pinhead. They were lit in a very specific way from behind to bring out all the beautiful features within them.
Hundreds of elements, including stuntmen, debris, and other objects, were photographed as separate components. They were then combined together on the optical printer, where camera rotations were added.
This is one of the most difficult shots we did, where we travelled through the mask of Jor-El and saw Superman for the very first time. It was a very important moment in the film and had to be a very impressive shot.
Matte paintings have been used since the advent of filmmaking. They're painted on glass by very skilled artists to enhance a shot, sometimes extending a set that is not there or even adding a sky. Here, the painting covers the stage lights and ceiling. It needs to blend in perfectly to the live-action image.
Here's the matte paintings that Les Bowie created for the Fortress of Solitude. All had to be very soft and delicately painted, which is a very difficult thing to do, to match the softness of the real set with the softness of the painting. He went on to paint the St Andreas Fault, which is seen behind Lois when she's in her car, and also the high-angle shots looking down onto the earth. In the railway sequence, the tracks had to be painted going off into the distance. It's a very exacting shot because these lines can't diverge in any way, and the perspective has to be 100% correct. Behind Christopher is painted tracks and landscape. Everything below the line was shot on the stage at Pinewood, and Les Bowie painted all the rest.
Of course, this was a film about a man that could fly. These effects were the most difficult to perfect. No idea was too extraordinary to experiment with.
Here are some of the early flying test footage, including a very first test. Slate number 1, take number 1. We actually catapulted a model Superman out of an air mortar. We didn't like the effect. There wasn't enough movement. This particular test is a radio-controlled Superman. The radio-controlled model was about 3 feet wide and of course just lacks life. You have to learn to introduce life into models to make them work. Here's another model flown on wires. It suffered from the same problem, no life. In fact, all these shots were very useful because they actually gave us the directions, if not the actual techniques and angles, that we eventually needed to use. This was an early animation test. We had a feeling that we might be able to animate Superman with a speed trail behind him, but alas, it wasn't photoreal enough. This test was quite humorous because we just projected the image behind the stuntman who had no idea how to act or fly. It's a nice example of how good Christopher Reeve actually is. This chap was one of our least expensive actors, but his performance was a little wooden. This is a typical wire shot we did against Black Velvet for the flying sequence with a pair of stunt people. Here's a test for a shot in Superman 2. We had to have a number of actors up on the wires. It's a complicated matter to coordinate all the characters together. The cameraman was actually flying with them to give the shot the same sense of movement in the air. This is what we called a power flight, out of the pool and through the roof, which again was using wires. There were many different techniques used to make Superman fly, but the best special effect of all was Christopher Reeve himself. We discovered very early on that he, being a glider pilot, could hold his body aerodynamically. So when he got into the harness, the whole shot began to come alive.
Suspending Superman from wires was used when he had to take off or land, usually when other actors were involved in the shot. Christopher Reeve was typically suspended from a tower crane 200 feet tall by 2 wires that were attached to a harness at his waist.
The landing here was interesting because we had to paint out the wires, which you can see. And the most difficult part was when the wires went slack, as when they landed. Wires that were not straight were very difficult to trace.
The blue screen technique was used when Superman needed to turn and twist in flight or become very small in the frame. The blue of the process screen is so pure, it allows itself to be photochemically removed and for the background to replace it in the optical printer.
But the fact that Superman's costume was blue did present us with a particular problem. It was too close to the colour of the blue screen. The wardrobe department had to create the costume closer to turquoise, which was different enough from the screen in colour. Christopher then had to be lit so that we could return the costume to its proper colour optically. In order to understand how the lion's share of the flying shots are photographed, it's necessary to understand the principles of front projection. This technique was supervised by Dennis Coop. The key to the whole system lies in the 3M's beaded screen material, which we made our screens of. The screen can reflect light back in the same direction at almost 1,000 times the original intensity, but only in exactly the same direction it came. A piece of glass, mirrored on one side and transparent on the other, is placed directly at 45 degrees in front of a camera lens. A projector that's projecting a background scene, let's say typically the desert or metropolis to go behind Superman, is then bounced off the mirror surface onto a 3M's beaded screen where it is greatly intensified. The light is then returned directly through the transparent side of the mirror into the camera lens. Now we have the actors mounted on an arm in front of the screen, and we need only light them moderately to overpower the front projected image that will be falling on them, and they are seamlessly inserted into the shot. This is a lightweight front projection rig we constructed. The projector in this configuration is attached below the 45-degree mirror. This apparatus is built to be extremely mobile to give as much movement as possible to the whole flying sequence, and Christopher himself can remain horizontal in front of the screen. Zoran Perisic added an interesting twist to the process by synchronizing zoom lenses in the projector and the camera to allow Superman to appear to fly directly towards or away without ever moving. Zoran called this process Zoptics.
Safe here, son.
In order to effectively sell the concept of Superman flying with great speed, given the fact that most of the time he was hardly moving, a special cape fluttering device was created which consisted of umbrella-like poles under the cape that moved by remote control. Superman was filled with a multitude of ingenious special effects techniques. Some were tried and true, others were invented especially for the film. Here are a variety of effects used throughout the movie.
I ask you now to pronounce judgment.
Guilty.
This sequence involved the faces of the judges looming over the courtroom. We used 9 Mitchell projectors, all rolling in sync. This is a test we did the day before Brando arrived, just so we could make sure everything worked technically before he actually had him on set.
Guilty.
The Krypton costumes were also made of 3M's material. We projected a white light into the 45-degree mirror onto the costumes, which would reflect the light and glow magically. This is a test for the Phantom Zone. We tried to look for different distorted effects, and we eventually settled on cramming them into a little rectangle which came down and collected the villains and took them away. Various other effects that we shot were pushing against the membranes, creating distortions, and tracking around the characters. The camera was in a spinning mount that would rotate in 360 degrees, and the actors were also turning. This created a multitude of movements. We also shot Brando and Susanna York on a turntable in a variety of different ways as options to show their deaths on Krypton, but these were never used. Here's an interesting test of Superman flying through lava. This was composited on video. We were trying a different approach. The scene itself was shot with a lot of aluminium foil and lit red, with Christopher flying on an arm or on wires. This is an early test of Superman receiving bullet hits. We actually superimposed many of these, although here the 45-degree mirror reflects them over the stuntman. And here is the scene as it was finished. This was a crazy test we did for Superman 2, showing Superman losing his powers. It turned out to be a little bit too psychedelic.
The sequence that displays the widest diversity of effects techniques is the helicopter scene. It was shot piece by piece over 12 months in 2 countries in at least 5 different locations. It truly became the signature scene that defined the movie.
Help me!
There was physical effects. Matte paintings. Front projection. Opticals.
Excuse me.
Wire work. And of course, fantastic heroics.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
We built this sequence up. It started with a few shots. We added more as we went along. Even to the extent that halfway through, Dick Donner thought that we should actually drop the helicopter, which wasn't originally scripted. Not one jeopardy, but double jeopardy. And the sequence became known as the Double Jeopardy sequence. Its success relies upon the intercutting of all the different techniques, and that's why it was so successful. They all blended so well together. Superman was a labour of love for all of us involved in the special effects, but we're very proud of what we were able to accomplish, and I'm pleased that I've been able to give you this opportunity to see the challenges we faced to make you really believe that a man could fly.